Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, welcome back to the Wisdom of, and welcome to the Wisdom of Alicia Ferguson. We live in an increasingly complex world, socially, politically, commercially, and we live at a time where we need leaders to act with wisdom, maybe more than ever before. We need to step away from these superficial tricks, tips, hacks that everybody's searching for, and understand that the future is really going to be a function of a renaissance of leaders that lean in on wisdom-driven thinking. And the goal of this show is to really bring a broad range of leaders, wise thinking leaders from around the world in all sorts of different arenas together, and to think about what is behind their thought processes, their decision making, how they show up, the sorts of things that they do as they achieve what they achieve. And so today, Alicia, I'd love to welcome you to the Wisdom of. This is going to be a super interesting conversation for people because you've got a pretty broad range of arenas, to pull this conversation from. And, let's kind of do the obligatory bio. And I know that people really don't like sitting through the bio. But I want people who don't know you to really understand, why we're so keen to have you on the show. So you first represented Australia in football, and for people all over the world, the soccer type football, right? You represented Australia in football at 15. I think it was the first time you wore the cap, or you had the cap for Australia, right? And then 2 world championships, and you can fill in the pieces. And then, of course, the Olympic Games in 2000 in Sydney, which must have been a blast to, play in your home games. For the Matildas, Australia's much-loved football team, women's football team, which just set the country on fire recently at the World Cup. And through a documentary as well that showed, that followed the journey of the Matildas, I think over 6 episodes in the series, and Alicia, you were the project manager for that as well. So you've made this transition, right, into the media, and not just the media as in a commentator, but the media as in, in management roles inside media, and then ultimately in your own media company, which is pretty interesting and seems quite risky. So, it's a very interesting elite level pathway to have been down at every level of that. And as you hear your own bio back like that, what starts happening in your head as you hear it back? It's really short compared to the whole journey, right? But what starts running in your head as you hear it back like that?
What starts running? First of all, thanks for having me on. Real pleasure to be involved in this amazing series. But I think what the first thing is that it doesn't seem that long ago that I made my debut for the Matildas. I can remember it like yesterday. It was against Hungary. It was my first European tour. We were away for 6 weeks. We went to 7 different countries throughout Europe, and I got the opportunity to come on and represent my country. Those were the days, just showing my age, where I had to get phone cards to call my parents. All the photos that I have are stacked up because we had to get them actually developed back then. And just what an incredible journey that I've had, and through amazing experiences. And actually football is the reason that I am where I am today. I'm the person that I am today, and that I've had this wonderful array of experiences, and being able to experience, I've basically spent most of my life traveling the world, kicking a ball around a pitch, hanging out with my best mates, and experiencing other cultures, cuisines, languages. It's been a pretty good existence.
For sure, right? Here's the thing. If I think about a 15-year-old, traveling in 7 countries, I think you said, phoning home on phone cards. I can remember that when I first traveled overseas, I used to have to send a telegram home, so I'm a little older than you, but you must have been a pretty mature 15-year-old though. And if you, just to actually even walk onto the pitch, I've worked with elite sporting people. I've worked with, a lot of people in the sporting world, and just the courage to walk out and represent your country is a whole other thing that a lot of people that have never done that probably might not even understand. To stand on the blocks for the swimming at the Olympic Games and put it all on the line. You know, to go out on the pitch as a 15-year-old, there's a certain amount of courage required just to actually go, I'm out there and I deserve to be. And I wonder what that 15-year-old self, what was some of the innate wisdom which other people might call naivety, but in fact, there was just some things you knew. What were some of the things that, if you could reflect back on that 15-year-old self, you just sort of knew there was wisdom in there that you just relied on and trusted?
Look, I was always very driven. Like football was my passion. What I would say is that, you know, looking back now, it was okay to be terrified. Actually, you know, yeah, we people talk about fear of failure a lot. I think as athletes, we fail I mean, everyone fails every single day, but we fail on the biggest stage. We fail in front of crowds. We fail on TV. We fail in front of friends, family, every single, you know, a lot of the time. But the different mindset is that we move on very quickly from that and we work out what we've learned from it and how we can progress. And that's what makes the difference between anyone at that elite level is, you know, we can, you know, being terrified and being scared of it is okay. You don't feel it at the time and you can't rationalize it at the time, particularly as a 15-year-old. But even just taking it back a couple of years, Simon, I got my first scholarship to the Queensland Academy of Sport when I was 13. And I had to go to a psychologist to have an interview for the QAS to deem that I was in the right mental state and was able to deal with the rigors of, we were training 4 or 5 days a week, twice a day. You know, I was in the gym 3 mornings a week as a 13-year-old and on the park training as a 13-year-old 4 times a week.
Yeah.
But to me, that was a dream come true. And I love that. But the care and attention that the QAS took with their athletes. And also I do feel very privileged that I was in a high performance environment from a very young age and with a lot of experienced players near me who were the ones that used to kick lumps out of me, used to give me great advice, used to take me under their arm to comfort me when things didn't go wrong. And it was a real support network of, okay, even in a really competitive environment, and we all have a common goal to win. So even if I was competing with someone in the same position, and, you know, you always want to be in the starting 11, but if you can't be in the starting 11, you still have a purpose within that team to make sure that your attitude, your effort, and your application are working towards the common goal, which I learned from a very, very young age. And I was so privileged for that. But I mean, just back to that European tour, this was how young and naive I was. And, you know, I don't think many Aussies know a lot about European geography, but we went to Estonia and I didn't even know Estonia was a country at 15. You know, like, you know, just being like, although I was watching, you know, football, I was out kicking the ball, I was training, and I thought, there's a country called Estonia. So, you know, the naivety of, I mean, and just to share, I've been to North Korea 3 times. Now, I only thought that North Korea was north of South Korea.
Yeah.
Didn't quite understand the political situation of North Korea when I first went there, and that was in '99, before the World Cup. So you talk about, the naivety, but it was also the kind of sledgehammer to the face exposure of, right, here you are.
Yeah.
With that, and how do you process that?
Fabulous. So you made an interesting comment, right? About how much athletes often fail, and people don't, you know, and that is the great story, you know, the Jordan stories, tried to put 100 perfect shots up, but it took him hours to do it. And Babe Ruth struck out more times than he actually hit a home run and all of these sorts of things. But, you know, the people that are keeping tally of that are usually the athlete rather than, you know, the public. But there's a really interesting model. One of the things that I do a lot of is use models as a way of understanding situations. And if we think about time in 3 dimensions, you know, we have the past, and I want to unpack the model a little bit and then get your insights into something. We have the present, and I've only just kind of thought about this in response to what you said, and then of course we have the future.
Yeah.
And the past is hindsight. Oops. So we look backwards and think about what happened. The present is insight, and the future is foresight. And if I look at the common human condition that we come across, if we look at average, right? A lot of people visit the past, with regret or blame. Why did that happen? They look to the future with anxiety often and fear. And, they spend 10 to 20% of the time in this zone and 10 to 20% of the time in this zone. And they might only spend about 60% of their time in the present doing things, right? I think athletes process these time zones differently. And I'd be really interested in your, the conversation about, so, you don't win a match or you don't play as well as you did. What do you go back to the past to process? And I suspect it's not this stuff. And how long do you spend there and what do you do with it and how do you bring it into the present? I know I'm springing this on you without notice, but I suspect elite athletes deal with this differently.
Yeah, we do. And I think you're absolutely right. I think our reflection on the past is a big part of where we are in the present.
Mm-hmm.
I think what we don't do a lot of is we don't want to spend too much time in that future, because spending time in the future means that you're looking at the outcome, not the actual process to get you there. So for me personally, and I'll use an example, and this is I hold a world record for the fastest red card in World Cup history. Now I got a straight red card in 99 at the age of 16, and this will explain why I've said this and I got sent off after a minute and a half. Now it was an irrational challenge. There was no malice in it, and I got a straight red card. But from what happened in my build up to that game, I was thinking far too much of the outcome rather than what processes I need to do for us to get a result and for me to perform well. So I let the occasion get hold of me. I let the emotion get hold of me. And rather than focusing on having a good first touch, making sure that I'm communicating with my teammates, I was thinking of the headlines. I was thinking that I wanted to score the winning goal. I was thinking that we were going to beat China, who were the eventual finalists. They came runners up to USA. And the emotional side of that got the better of me because I stopped focusing on what the process was.
Yeah. So
the past, our past hugely influences our present, but we take away a fair bit of that anxiety and fear about what the future holds.
Sure. And what is it? So that's interesting. If I kind of summarize this, you're changing this balance that the average might have. We spend about 20% of the time in the future. What you're really saying is the longer you spend focusing on the outcome, the less you spend in process executing.
I think so. Look, there's also, there's different levels of goal setting and the way to focus on, and that's still an outcome focus. But and we know this in goal setting, then we always work our way back.
Yeah.
So there's the goal, and then okay, what's the process? And our day in day out process. It's not the perfection of repetition. It's that just the repetition of improvement, and because perfection is unrealistic in anything, but it's back to that simple thing: control the controllables.
Yeah, great.
So I had a very good coach say once, we can't control the referee, we can't control the conditions, you can't control what the opposition are going to do, whether they're going to kick you, whether they're going to play a lot better than you. But, and as I said before, what we can control ourselves is our attitude, our application, and our effort. Now that also, I think, hits home when you're having a stinker of a game, when you've got to touch like a baby elephant and you're losing possession or you're not helping your teammates. But what can I control? Right, I can control my positive attitude. I can control my effort, so the amount that I actually stay engaged in the game, and I can control I forgot the attitude, effort, and application. So how do I apply myself? So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my first touch is a better first touch, and then that I keep possession this time. And you use it in smaller increments. So you stay in the present, right? What can I do right now or in the very near future without looking too far ahead? I think it's the foresight. I think the anxiety and fear of the foresight is looking too far into the future and putting too much expectation on what that outcome is, and not really focusing on what's happening right here and now.
So there is, and it's interesting, as I've studied this particular conversation with, people in elite performance and then people who maybe not at that level, people at elite performance do go into the future to find the goal.
Yep.
And it's kind of less than 10% of their time spent doing that. And they want to bring that immediately back into the present.
Yep.
What do we need to do now to get
Absolutely.
that to happen? And they go into the past, once again, less than 20%, but it's to find the lessons.
Mhm.
Not worried about this. And how do we bring that into the present?
Mhm.
And there's an interesting model that says if this is where we are today, and I project forward and I say too far forward and I say, World Cup in 4 years, wouldn't that be amazing? But also, we could lose in 4 years. Wouldn't that be dreadful? And both those paths could exist. And the reality is, if you go too far forward, this gap starts to get scary. The consequence. Whereas if you're just here,
Mhm.
let's do this. It's incremental. Let's manage this. So what do we need to do to stay on that? So super interesting. Um, the fastest red card in World Cup history is that still true? The fastest red
It's
card?
still true. Yep, it's still true. I don't think. I mean, a minute 35. I was walking off. It was at New York Giants Stadium in front of about 40,000 people. It was, but you talk about that. You know, I had definitely some maturity levels
Yeah,
at that point. It was my first World Cup. I was 17 years old. I got too overawed by the occasion and not
sure.
actually what my job was and what my functions were and how I could help my teammates. But you know what? It's one of the best things that ever happened to me as a player, even though I didn't think it at the time. I cried for the rest of the game. But so when I talk about, people fail every day,
Yeah,
I failed in front of 40,000 people actually on site. I failed in front of a TV audience. It was shown on ESPN. There's a clip on YouTube that has a fair few number of views. That's, I think, called like, "Is this the worst women's football tackle ever?" But it happened. So can't, can't change that at all. So, okay. But it made me a better player. It made me a better person. And it allowed me anytime, it was also my reference point at any
yes,
times where I started getting to outcome focused, and it allowed me to bring it back to, okay, remember what happened when you did do that. So, I don't think it's like, it's not the encouragement of failure, but it's the acceptance and the understanding. And I think sport, and especially team sport, or just generally sport, actually, exactly like you said, team sport's a really good like lesson for life, because you do fail a lot. There's a
mm,
the winning percentages are pretty low for a lot of athletes. And we talk about those transferable skills, but again, it's the environment around you that's created where you win together, you lose together, and everyone does have that common goal. And it's like, not, there might be some questions, and you reflect personally, but it's okay. Well, if the coach is still picking this team, then how are we going to improve? How are we going
sure.
to change it, turn it around?
There's a couple of things that you've said that are interesting. I'm going to go down that path. I actually obviously have a plan of things I was going to ask you, but you've said much more interesting things than I was going to plan to ask you. So I'll just go down that path instead. I often hear myself saying to people, the environment always wins. And so, you build the environment for success, whether that is how the team is being put together and supported and worked with, and the coaching teams and everything else. And you're absolutely right. You can only control what you can control, and that's where your focus should go. Um, and this idea that be willing to accept failure. And I feel like in the business world and, in not-for-profit spaces and things like that, those things aren't always present. People have this view that they're going to be outrageously successful right from the get-go. Setbacks don't happen, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there's some real transfers. I'd love to ask you to start to lean into, the shift into business, because you're a business person. You've led and you've built, business, and I'd love to kind of lean in on how those things have applied post elite sporting career, and in some of your business activities and ventures.
Yeah, well, look, I think also there's a level of accountability, isn't there? So there's
Mm,
always someone in charge that has that accountability. So even if we as the players have let that leader down, then unfortunately there's someone that is accountable. And there's collateral damage around failure as well, and everyone needs to be aware of that. And I think as athletes, we're not saving lives. We're not. We're playing sport. We're chasing a ball around a pitch, and there needs to be a level of perspective of that. And then I think the transference into the business world, yeah, there is definitely an economical side of elite sport where you get funding, you do this, you do that, but you still can go out and keep training and training and training. Like we never really got paid, so that doesn't make too much of a difference. So I think we need to be very careful in sport to try and profess that we know a lot about the business world, because we don't. I think what Michelle Kang is an owner of a couple of women's football clubs now. So she is a Korean American medical tech entrepreneur, Michelle
Yep.
Kang, and she got the money to buy Washington Spirit in the US. And what she was saying, what she found quite difficult to understand in sport is the fact that people want to see success very, very quickly. Whereas actually in a lot of the business world, the financial modeling and actually the outcome and the profitability is kind of a 10-year process, or 5 to 10-year return on investment for all those investment types. And I found that really interesting, where we can be very short-term focused. And that's probably because of the life cycle of an athlete, where you think if you want a sustainable company, then you want it to be sustainable for 50, 60, 100 years and continue on that cycle of growth. But as athletes, we have a shelf life, and then we churn and churn and churn. And I think, yeah, we definitely have some transferable skills about that elite athlete mindset, but I also think our understanding of the business world could definitely be improved as well. And I think the benefit of now these days, and platforms like this and other platforms, is that we have all that we have the insight, and we also have the relationships where we can go and actually seek these out, because then we get the benefits of understanding about what that high-end business looks like and what success looks like in the corporate world compared to what it looks like in the sporting world, because they are two different things.
Yeah, wildly different.
Yeah, like elite sport is great, but we're nothing like the corporate world in a lot of ways. And I think probably the closest is like the American system, the franchise modeling, where sport is the vehicle. Sport is the vehicle for the business and the profitability. We don't, there's places where I think Australia, we're still trying to work that out, where sport is still the fundamental thing. The business of sport isn't what it's about. Like sport is sport. That's us. So I think it's quite interesting to see where each region of the world. I lived in London for 11 years. The Premier League is basically, in the UK, there is football, then rugby union, then maybe something else, the Olympics, and then more football.
Yeah.
So the business of that is pretty extraordinary, and what they've done there is made a hugely profitable business.
Yeah. It's interesting that, I mean, sport is a business, no doubt. I've spoken at multiple conferences actually where, someone has spoken about sport or the business of sport. And then we've been talking about, business itself. And one of the big differences between sporting teams is exactly what you said before. The team has the goal in mind, which is let's win this thing. Yep. And not every business has everyone in the business with the same goal in mind, which is let's win this thing, right? And so the moment you fracture that single defining goal that everybody's going after, you start to lose some of the nature of the elite kind of focus that might actually go with that. And you became the head of delegation for the FIFA Women's World Cup for 2023, right? And so this is outside of a playing role now and kind of right in a management role, right? And that would have been that would have been an interesting space, because I think you're probably hurting a lot of personalities and things like that in process. You would have transferred some of your skills from your professional playing career into that, but also I'm sure you started to acquire other skills and some of the skills you had picked up from broadcasting. What were some of the lessons out of that period? Because I'm not sure that everyone would have a role like that over time, where there's lots of different agendas in play.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Look, I think that role is similar to a chef de mission, like Anna Mears is now for our Olympic team. I think that role is the forward-facing role, representing the delegation. It's also being the the manager between FIFA, who organised the tournament, and our own team, and working out ways and, you know, logistics and things like that, and just being the buffer. So basically, I was keeping any issues, concerns, questions, anything, you know, whether the pitch wasn't exactly how we wanted it, whether equipment or whatever, being that buffer and having those high level conversations with the organising committee and just allowing our team to focus inward. So just so they could focus on the job at hand and I could focus outwardly. And look, I got to meet some incredible people. You know, I was in the circles of our Prime Minister, our Minister of Sport and Aged Care, at a high level, you know, Gianni Infantino is the president of FIFA. Fatma Samora was the general secretary before she retired. And just really interesting to see, also just to see how sport brings people together. And also that there's a real commonality in sport that a lot of other businesses don't have. So if you're in the tech business or you're in as an entrepreneur or you're in the textile business, like what's connecting the dots? For me personally, and I use this analogy, I was a central midfielder, so like a holding midfielder in front of the back four. So I was basically connecting our defense to our midfield to our attack. So even in this role, and even as project manager of the Disney docuseries, I was like, I used to joke I was the head of keeping people happy, but the connecting the dots and just being the you know, the one who was facilitating conversations, actioning things when it needed to be actioned, escalating things when they needed to be escalated, having difficult conversations, bringing people along for the ride. It was exactly like I was as a player. I was a holding midfielder. I'd be constantly chatting to people and pulling people in a direction, making sure they were all on the same page. And I think through my role in sport, it's kind of continued in my professional role in broadcasting and then in this role as well. And look, I had what an experience, you know, going from being a player to covering the game as far as broadcasting and then experience it from a head of delegation role. It was just, did I ever think that I'd be, you know, sitting in the VVIP next to the Prime Minister of Australia, like, chatting about the Matildas and whether we're going to beat France in a penalty shootout? No, I didn't ever think that. But it was a pretty incredible experience.
I am sure. And, you know, if you look at any great success that has impact, every single time you will find that holding midfielder role, whether that is business or a charity or a government department or a sporting team. Wherever there's great success in the collective, there's always someone in that facilitation role that is just holding things together. Holding midfield's a great description of a position. And you know, I was a hockey player. We just had halfbacks, you know. Like I wish we described them as holding midfielders, you know, it would have made more sense. But
yeah, well, I mean, they changed it now, Simon. And the new thing is called number 6, but it's basically, you know, you basically sit in front of the back four, and then there's might be 3 in front of you there, and you literally are the one. Sometimes there's 2 of you that can help out. You're in the same position, but it really is. It's like you've got this 360-degree view of your teammates in the pitch in that role. So, you know, your forwards are always looking back this way with their back to goal. Tends sometimes there, and then your fullbacks tend to look one way. So you've got this, you are in this 360-degree role where you're constantly turning around and maintaining that contact with so many areas. And I think probably it's only over the last probably 3 years, and in that project management role and then in the head of delegation, I've actually, like, the penny has dropped that, okay, right, this is my transferable skill from being a leader into my work now.
Of course. And I would challenge anyone listening to this to think about that for a moment. You know, like, let's just take company, let's just take business, right? You need a CEO, you need a CFO, you need a COO, you need a, you know, a director of sales, you need a director of fulfillment and delivery, et cetera, et cetera. But I wonder how many businesses think through the process of who is our holding midfielder? You know, who's going to do that for us? And it could be one of the roles already in the organization, but who is our holding midfielder? You know, who can actually just have the 360 view of what is going on and make sure that we're heading in the right direction, even though people are looking specifically in the direction their particular role the sales teams are often looking toward the goal. They're like the offense, and they're looking to go out and kind of score and win. The defense is sort of like delivery. We actually need to put this on the table once you've promised it to the world. We've got to make this thing. But who's the holding midfielder? It is Alicia, it's a really nice way of thinking about organizational design. What a fabulous quality that would be. And could you even think about going to an Olympic Games or a World Cup, or do a 6-part show with Disney if you don't have someone in the holding midfielder role? It's it's a significant business lesson from sport, quite frankly.
Well, yeah, and like I said, it's probably one that I've only realized in the last, and it's one of those things. It's like a nice to have or a need to have, and every organization and even every sporting team, and you need to work out, is it a nice to have or a need to have, and how does that actually work, and how much value do you put on it? And I absolutely understand that. I think as far as the project manager role, my experience is in production and behind the scenes as a broadcaster. The reason I love production and being a producer, and I've done on camera stuff as well, but it's the storytelling. Similar to this, I love hearing that you're a hockey player. I love what's the story? What is the story of people, and being able to connect the documentary team with a high performance environment where there has to be very specific boundaries and an understanding that the documentary team were coming into the Matildas environment, and they had certain outcomes and what they needed to deliver on behalf of Disney. Actually, in a high performance environment, it can be a pretty tricky place to navigate because it's very highly strung. There's professional athletes coming in, and the time that you actually get with our players as a national team is very, very short. So even for our head coach of the national team, how do you quickly get all these players that are playing all around the world with different styles? How do you get them really quickly to then switch on to playing for Australia, different style against a certain opposition? So that adaptability of thought and that flexibility, I think, also particularly in a lot of sports, and that decision making, that quick decision making, you have to be decisive and you have to just go with it, and you learn that on the fly. And I think that's a real strength of the successful elite athletes as well.
So for the better part of 20 years, I've taught project management as a discipline. And, project management has little to do with the software that you use to track the project and the Gantt charts you build and things like that. It has everything to do with what I'm now going to call the holding midfielder position, right? It is that adaptable person, because the other bit that I didn't admit to is I was a goalkeeper, right? So no one understands us, but actually no one understands anyone else's position. And I'm not even sure that they really care that much. They're focused on their own thing, but who's holding that space in a project inside, like a key project in an organization, new platform being implemented, or a new product being launched, or a new production that's going to be made? Who is holding that high degree of adaptability and flexibility and can see all perspectives, and then has the skill to actually bring everyone together for that same goal that often isn't on offer because there's a world championship to win. It's a business. So there's often not this very visible thing. So we've got to find that. And I suspect there's a fair bit of resilience that's come from your sporting career, and then in your kind of post-sporting work life, there has to be resilience inside that holding midfielder capacity that you have. And I'd be interested in imagine for some reason some 13-year-old girls are going to end up watching this, and I'd love to kind of get your take on resilience and what you'd most want them to know about from a resilience point of view, because I think it's one of the things we really need to challenge people to think more deeply about, being more resilient in the world that we're faced with today.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think resilience is, it's also, it's also to cry in the shower. It's also okay to feel inadequate. It's also, that's all part of actual resilience. That's all part of real inward perspective. And there's still times where I've been incredibly proud of what I've done, and I know I've so many strengths, but it's still okay to and also to understand that resilience is also, exactly what we were saying before, and people hear this all the time. It's exactly like being a holding midfielder. I actually started as a striker, and I basically I couldn't score goals and I wasn't fast enough. So I had to repurpose myself, and I had to look and see, okay, well, I'm not actually properly suited to that role.
Yeah.
I- I've got a really good first touch. I can connect the dots. I can play the ball. I can keep it simple. I'm a good communicator. That's my skill set. And I had the help of a coach who actually identified that in me. Now, if that coach hadn't identified that, my international career probably wasn't going to be as long or prolonged as it was if I'd stayed trying to be a forward or a striker trying to score goals. So also it's being open and allowing people to give you that feedback, and to give you the insight that sometimes you might know in the back of your head, but it's a pretty scary thing to change and to want to change, because you don't know what you don't know. So I didn't know I had the skill set to be a holding midfielder because I never played there. So we all need a little bit of help at times, and actually probably a lot of the time. And it's, it's like, it's finding your wolf pack. It's finding your pack of people who, whether it's professionally or personally, that can actually, the ones that can be, the really brutally honest, that, okay, it might hurt. There's a few chinks in the armor and you don't like hearing it, but they're the ones that you trust, and that you trust to give you that feedback, and also give you some insight that you might know, but you can't actually articulate, or you can't see yourself.
I love that. I love that take on it, particularly for young people listening. Resilience doesn't mean you have to be tough as nails and unbreakable. Resilience is about being open and willing to have other people give you feedback and help you and take some guidance, be coachable.
Yeah. Resilience is bounce back. That's what
Great,
resilience is. I,
great,
I, I feel like resilience is bounce back. Resilience is not failing in the first place. It's how you bounce back. So
perfect.
that's resilience to me.
That's
So if
fabulous.
I lose possession and the opposition score a goal, resilience isn't not letting that happen in the first place. It's not letting that happen again, and what my behavior is post that. No, no
That's
one, no one
fabulous.
wakes up in the morning and goes, you know what? I want to fail today. Can't I can't wait to fail. Oh, what a great day I'm going to feel for. No one goes out there wanting to fail, but it happens, and the bounce back is the resilience. And it's
Fantastic.
okay to feel it, and you have to, and we talk about this present, you have to feel it in the present moment. And it's going to feel pretty rubbish a lot of the time, but it's how quickly you have that bounce back ability.
Fabulous. So I'm going to just lean in on a couple of questions, and then I'd love to finish just with some fast questions to get some rapid responses at the end. I'm pretty interested, thinking about the future of women's football, but maybe the future of women's sport. In so many arenas, like in Australia with our Australian rules football, the women's Australian rules football league has kind of taken off, and obviously the Matildas versus our Socceroos and things like that. And in a lot of cases, it's a different style of play, and a lot of cases, dare I say, more watchable, because it it's not a brute force kind of game sometimes, which sometimes sport can be. So sport, women's sport particularly, has, I think, a tremendous future ahead of it. I'm sort of interested in where you think women's football is headed, and maybe women's sport in general, because it felt like in Australia during the Women's World Cup, all anybody was talking about was the Matildas, and we had changed our whole schedule to try and watch all their games and everything else. It felt like it was just going through the roof. I'd love to get your take on women's football and even women's sport in general.
I mean, it was a seminal moment, wasn't it? I mean, it's
Oh,
everything that every athlete aspires to do, to actually, because we all play and we represent our country because we love the sport that we do. But ultimately, and you talk about, and this word kind of legacy is thrown around a fair bit and it can be misused a little bit, but the impact that these players have had on not just the next generation of players, but actually the whole sporting and the visibility and actually the mindset of people who are actually now watching sport. All we ever want, and part of equality in sport, is no gender bias.
mm,
That's all we want. No gender bias. No gender bias. Now with that, of course, there's always going to be people, and we've all got our unconscious bias. We can't, and it's very hard to untrain a lot of that. But what we've seen now, and I understand it. I was a part of the product where we were full-time athletes, but we weren't professional athletes. So we were only get to a certain stage of competitiveness and level of performance. These players are now actually full-time professionals training in high performance environments with international players on a day in, day out basis. And what you saw at the World Cup is the end product of about 10 years of full-time professionalism in women's football. Now, so basically what that means is that can happen in other sports. Now, but scaling that back, we're very lucky in football. Football is a truly global game. AFL women's and AFL is huge in Australia. What benefit we have, and I know we're very lucky, is that football is transferable all around the world. AFL is very localized, and so commercially, a World Cup brings all the best athletes from all over the world. We're so fortunate to have that. And that's not to say we are a sports-mad country, so it's fantastic that and AFL and NRL are investing in their women's side of things. And obviously an Olympic Games is our bread and butter, right? We love an Olympic Games. And we're a sports-mad country. That's it. We've got the passion for it. But I think what it shows is just the ability, if you invest in things like anything, it's like you buy cheap, you buy twice. So if you actually invest in the quality and you invest in the product and you invest in the people, then actually more just investing in the people and investing in the people, and you said it before, Simon, investing in the environment around those people, then your outcomes speak for themselves, don't they?
Things happen.
Things happen. And it's, I don't think it's too much of a risk these days. And actually the return on investment for actually investing properly in women's sport, role modeling, output, as you say, entertainment value, and actually the match day experience, where we're onto something here. We're onto something really positive. Everything was positive from that World Cup.
It was. And I think it started a conversation too. People often talk about legacy. And I know we've been going for a little while, but I'm really enjoying the conversation. People talk a lot about legacy, and I think a lot about the third generation of legacy. So your time is here, then the next generation got to see you, but what did the next generation get as a result of you being there? And I loved what you said about, it's not just the behaviors you might change in the generations that follow, but the mindset and the thinking that might change. And there are some common agendas that, even though people might have different agendas, there are some common agendas that are true for everybody. And one of the key common agendas is, I want to be seen as one of these people, and I want the same done to me. So as an example is fairness. I want to be seen as a fair person, and I want to be treated fairly. I want to be seen as a kind person, and I want to be treated with kindness, and all anyone ever asked for is equity and fairness and respect the performance, which is what I think we saw in the World Cup. All of a sudden, everybody went, well, these women playing football, not just for Australia, but for all of the countries, have put a great product on the stage, and that should be respected. And of course, here at least, it's just exploded interest level, which is fantastic.
And even for that, the World Cup, there's only one winner.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean that every other nation where the investment is there has lost out because their country didn't win, because there's a lot more to it. And that's where it's diversifying that thought process as well of what is success.
Yeah.
So it's, and in sport, there's so many facets of it as well. And say maybe more so in the corporate world, of course, there's a lot of the bottom line, but how are you getting to there? How do you get to there? And that kind of, they're the building blocks of the success anyway. And I think that's very similar in sport. And that was it. We came forth, we did great. We didn't win it, but you know what? It felt like we won something. And actually it felt like we won a lot.
I agree with that. It changed the country actually in a lot of ways. I'm going to do some fast questions in a minute, but it'd be remiss of me letting you go as an Olympian without you sharing, for people who have never actually gone to Olympic Games as an athlete, what does it feel like when you walk into the stadium on the opening ceremony for your first Olympic Games, or at the Olympic Games, and you're there, you made it to the Olympic Games. You've still got to compete. It's all ahead of you, but it's that first point where we're really here. What is that feeling like for people who don't get to experience that?
walking into the Olympic Stadium at the Sydney Olympics was the highlight of my career and probably the highlight of my life. And I was very privileged. I missed out on 2004 through injury. So 2000 was my one and only Olympics, but nothing will ever compare to it. And I was so excited being embedded with the Matildas for the World Cup because they were going to experience the fandom, the support of a home World Cup that I experienced at the Sydney Olympics. And there is nothing like it. I remember us walking into the stadium, the noise was deafening. It felt like the camera flashes, it felt like it was infinite. It went all the way up into the sky, the camera flashes, the noise created. And then we were right up the front, and Betty Cuthbert and Kathy Freeman came down the middle, and Kathy lit the cauldron. And then we were there. We burst into the stadium for that wonderful day. So Tatiana Grigorieva was winning a pole vault medal at one end. Jai Tarima was winning a long jump medal across. And Kathy Freeman won in the 400 meter. It was the most incredible sporting experience I've ever had. And even as a competition as a whole, the Olympics is pretty special because we're around the corner from, so in the morning you see Kathy Freeman, and the swimmers, and you're in this huge dining hall with NBA stars and the Michael Johnsons of the world and just sporting superstars everywhere, just going about their normal business. So it's such a, it's really hard to put into words. It's as simple. It was my career highlight. It was bloody amazing. And I'm so glad that I got to experience it at Home Olympics. I really, as a full circle moment, you talk about roles and work. I really want to work on Brisbane 2032. I'm from Brisbane. I played the 2000 Olympics. I want to find, and I'm navigating that as we speak, trying to work out ways to come full circle of being an athlete in 2000 and getting involved and being, at 2032 in my home city, because it's just, they're amazing. They're amazing. And we love sport, and we host really great sporting tournaments. We're fantastic. I don't think any other country does multi-sport Olympics or anything like we do. We do it we're pretty special over here.
Well, the 2000 Olympics were amazing. by every measure, right? And by almost every commentator too, and the Olympic Committee themselves. So I've run a little over time. I'd like to ask you just two quick questions, fast questions, quick responses, so people can know you a little bit better. And, so as an athlete, you know how to train for stuff, right? But if you could master any skill without any practice, just like click your fingers, got the skill, what would it be and why?
Any skill would be, that's what any skill would be. You know what? I've got terrible hand-eye coordination. So actually, if we talk about the sporting realm, I really want to get good at paddle or tennis because I'm absolutely terrible at it. Put a ball on my feet, I'm fine, but hand-eye coordination, I'm pretty poor.
Perfect. And if you could get deep inside the mind of any person in history, who might that be and why would you want to do that?
I would love to get deep inside the mind of a Serena Williams. I think she's such an incredible, inspirational boss woman, business person, unapologetic, has come from a difficult background to be one of the most successful sports people in the world.
It's true. Wouldn't it be nice to just be able to watch her thought process in action, like a video, to see what she's actually working through? And
I feel like it would be the unwavering belief and uncompromising in that belief, and very, again, decisive and direct about what she wants and how she communicates it. I think she would be absolutely fantastic to sit down and pick her brain.
Fantastic. So we've run a little longer than we normally do, and I'd like to thank everybody who's watching this for staying with us during the full length of the episode. And I'd particularly like to thank Alicia Ferguson for sharing her deep wisdom and genius with us. Some of the highlights, starting an international football career at 15 and thinking about what you learn from that whole understanding of, if you project too far forward into the outcome, you stop focusing on the process You can become more fearful and more anxious if you go too far out into the future. Go to the past to get the lessons, but it's back into the present moment and start to execute against process. I think you said attitude,
application, attitude, application.
yeah, perfect. And then how do you take those lessons that you've learned from any elite environment and keep transferring them? And for me, Alicia, the big lesson was this notion of the holding midfielder, that, playing that role, not just in football, but in organizations, whether it's a project that you're managing, a complex delegation that you are the delegation leader for on an international sporting stage, or it could be a company dealing with government agencies and the open marketplace, but who in an organization is in that holding midfielder role that has the 360 view and is allowing everybody else to focus on what they've got to focus on, but you have the whole thing held together. So much gold to take out of this. And I'd lastly like to lay down the challenge for everyone to contemplate how you could take lessons out of this show and think about how you can use those lessons to contribute to how you show up and have an impact in whatever arena you're actually playing in. So Alicia, thank you very, very much for giving us so generously of your time.
Thanks, Simon. Pleasure.